Yep. Thank you. Okay, so here we go. Hi, my name is Mog. I'm an organizer with Resist US-Led War Portland, or Resist for short. And I'm in one of its member organizations, Clown Block. So just so you know, this webinar will be recorded, like I said, so you are fully informed. The Resist US-Led War movement is a global network of anti-war and peace organizations and committed individuals fighting to end all of the many manifestations of US-led war and militarism around the world. We are a network of anti-war and pro-peace organizations united to build solidarity among the peoples of the world to fight back against wars and dismantle the war machine. We are also a campaign network to individuals and grassroots groups for initiating actions, campaigns, and movements to oppose US-led war and wars of aggression in general. Finally, we are a resource for anti-war movement building with information about the military-industrial complex, arms buildup, sanctions, military strategies, and everything else that includes. Resist struggles against U.S.
Sorry,
military.
Mog, just to check, is my screen still sharing?
Oh, not so much.
Yeah, it says it's pod. I don't know why. Sorry, tech difficulties.
That's okay.
How about now?
Yeah, you're good now.
I might just keep it like this, not full screen. Maybe it's getting a little freaked out by the full screen. Sorry to interrupt. Back to you.
That's okay. Doing good. All right. Where was I? Yes. Resist struggles against U.S. militarism all over the world and here at home. What does that mean? It means that we push for the withdrawal of U.S. military troops, occupations, bases, war games, and exercises in West Asia, Africa, East, Central, and South Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, the Pacific Islands, and East Europe. We resist US, NATO, AFRICOM, and CIA counterinsurgency operations, proxy wars, and other forms of covert intervention. We fight Zionism, apartheid, and systemic racism. We fight against the US military-industrial complex, including divestment from the hundreds of billions spent on war and militarization, and redirecting of public funds towards people's needs, development, and infrastructure. And of course, resistance is not enough. We need to also be building an alternative, something better. And so we also believe in creating a just and lasting peace. And what does that mean? That means justice, social equity, and solidarity amongst peoples, including the recognition of the right to self-determination, economic and food sovereignty, and self-defense of nations and oppressed peoples from reactionary aggression and violence. We believe in building peace through genuine sustainable development, job creation, and the health and well-being of our communities. We believe in international solidarity across all people's movements that seek true sovereignty from imperialism in its many forms. So today, we are here to talk about the International Day of Peace, the false solutions brought forward by the United Nations, and the genuine grassroots alternatives to accomplish peace. So just some background, some history about the International Day of Peace. It was established by the UN in 1981. It's supposed to be this day of ceasefires, nonviolence, the opportunity for people on all sides of all of these major wars across the world to come together and chat and really just resolve things. So not only is this just like a classic example of a performative action, but it doesn't even remotely start to address any of the root issues causing the global conflicts it's claiming to be calling a pause to. It also doesn't recognize or include any of the people's national liberation struggles. At no point do the people, their representatives, their strategies, their perspectives, or their analyses get invited to the table to find peace. The people in the UN that call this day to ceasefire are so removed from the actual violence that they couldn't begin to understand what the people on the ground are calling for. They can pull their militaries out of direct combat for one day, but that doesn't keep the people's movement safe from state-sponsored police violence and surveillance. It doesn't take into account that some people have to fight in a war that they didn't choose just to survive under hegemonic control. On the UN-sanctioned Day of Peace, we hear from the largest military powers that represent the most corrupt economic entities in the world. The solutions they offer are not genuine. The holidays they make up are not for us. Since the Cold War allegedly ended, the UN has been seeking out peace under the conditions of a United States hegemony. And as long as monopoly corporations are able to collude with governments in order to keep the world in a state of constant extraction, there will be no peace. The UN isn't offering up solutions to imperialism, they're offering a distraction from it. Today, we're interested in investigating the UN's proposed solutions to war and bringing forward the people's alternative to creating peace on Earth. So today, we're going to hear from 4 grassroots organizers working on different angles towards that genuine, just, and lasting peace. We will hear from Julia from the Asia Pacific Research Network, Nzinga from the All African People's Revolutionary Party, Dan from Veterans for Peace via recording, and Cody from Resist US-Led War. We'll have a quick Q&A session at the end if time allows. And just real quick, at the end, we're going to ask for a group picture. And if you want to have a paper and pen near you and write something to the tune of Resist US-Led War, fight for just and lasting peace, you can hold that up at the end and it'll be super cute. Great. So moving right along, first we have Julia, the Secretary General for the Asia Pacific Research Network. We work with APSN a lot to develop our anti-imperialist analysis and strategies in the Asia Pacific. Julia is going to talk to us about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. We're excited to have her here with us and to learn from her and start thinking about how to approach the SDGs from a grounded people first perspective. And with that, I will pass it over to Julia.
Thanks, Mog. Hi, everyone. So nice to have all of us here. It's a very intimate webinar, but nonetheless, we'll make the most out of it. As Mog mentioned, I am from the Asia Pacific Research Network. I'm the General Secretary of the organization. We are an organization regional network that is working in Asia and the Pacific. We mostly work on themes related to trade, environment, and of course, militarism, where we closely work with Resist US-Led War. So just to give a brief background on our network, we are a regional research network that operates in Asia Pacific. Our members are mostly composed of civil society organizations, people's movements, and grassroots sectors. So we work not only in Asia Pacific, but we also expand our work in within and beyond international networks. So all in the pursuit of genuine and transformative change that is founded on the people's aspirations and realities. So one of the main work that APRN handles for the past year is inside and outside the realm of the United Nations, specifically on the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs as we know it. So recently, well, last year, we had our research conference, which really dive deep into the SDGs that is based on the people's realities and the people's aspirations, and we titled it Redefining Development, Fight for System Change. And we encourage our members to discuss development issues that they face among their sectors or their communities, and how it could transform into the people's alternatives that we look for, that is quite different or quite pale in comparison and compared to the SDGs. So I will go with my presentation right now. I don't have a slide, so I will just be conversing casually with all of you. I think the conversation about the UN and the SDGs in particular comes at a very relevant time. Actually, this year we are at the midpoint of the implementation of the SDGs. So since it was adopted in 2015, we have seen that many countries have taken on the huge responsibility of integrating the SDGs into their national policies and programs. And at the same time, we have seen the world has faced multiple crises that has evolved and worsened over time. One of the recent ones is COVID-19 pandemic. And we think that apart from the current socioeconomic, health, and climate crisis that we face, one of the crises that the world is also grappling to struggle is its achievement of just and lasting peace. So as the UN marks its I think 42nd year of declaring September 21 as the International Peace Day, it appears like its particular scope of work is really fast tracking the adoption of the SDGs alongside booster plans that it introduces, such as the Our Common Agenda and the Pact for the Future that it will premiere next year during the Summit of the Future. So we see these kinds of maneuvers from the UN, but I think what warrants for a conversation is what is the main core of the UN and how it operates. At the same time, how does it um, use the SDGs as a way to fast track not development for the people, but development for a certain few. So we'll go through that. So the UN has a long history of being a tool of monopoly capitalists and bourgeoisie and many imperialist countries such as the US in fast tracking its own self-serving agenda. So we see that the SDGs are being used just as a facade to really justify corporate capture of development and the existence of many foreign entities and countries, especially here in the global south. Behind its seemingly noble aspirations really lies the truth on whom the SDGs and the UN truly serve, which is to facilitate discussions and decisions in favor of the ruling class. So I guess it also warrants for us to mention that at the center of the UN body is the Security Council, which I know other colleagues will be diving deep later on, and the manifestations of it in countries. But within the Security Council, there are five permanent members: the US, Britain, France, Russia, and China. And this particular group of country has power to really hold the decisions and the conversation in the UN, and it is a body that really authorizes the use of force and other sanctions such as peacekeeping operations and other interventions within countries. So we see that these institutions really gives power to these countries within the UN system itself. So we see that it is then no surprise why UN is very mum about wars and conflicts that is happening across the globe, because at its very core with those five countries, we see that it is the five key players that we have seen for the past few years who perpetrates and instigates wars. So during the past few years, we have seen intensified military alliances and new ones being formed as we speak. So, particularly here in the Asia Pacific region, we have the AUKUS, the Quad, the Five Alliances, and the SCO. So, this is on top of the many bilateral security agreements that is happening within governments and other Asia Pacific countries. So, going back to the SDGs, we see that the SDGs is really being used as a tool for the UN to justify their maneuvers in the economic and the military aspect in many member countries that it has. So we see that through its banner call of people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships, profit-hungry and bloodthirsty countries continue to operate under the guise of international community or democracy or foreign policies, where in fact, the UN is not a neutral platform or neutral arbiter in international conflicts and trade agreements. Rather, it continues to play an active role in ignoring the class dynamics and the multipolarity that is existing inside and outside the UN body. In particular, in SDG 16, which is about peace, government, and other institutions, there is a fail to mention to the accountability of the countries such as the US and China in instigating wars in many global South countries um, internationally. So we see that the root causes of war that is driven by self-serving. Let me just I'm so sorry for that. Where was I? Yeah, so we see that the root causes of war isn't really being addressed by the SDGs itself. Not just war, but more so the development and prosperity of the people themselves. So we see that for the SDGs to truly work for it to truly function the way it is envisioned to function, the people's participation and the people's involvement in these goals should be at the front and center of the conversation, but in reality it doesn't work that way. So we see that in many engagements that we have done with the UN, and us personally and the Asia Pacific Research Network, we do engage with the UN, but we see that it is very limited in a way, and it's also limiting in a way because 5 minute or 2 minute interventions would only make such a difference in the grand scheme of things. So we really hold premium to how we critically engage with the UN among other bodies that it holds. And we think that we should really not lose sight of the more important issues that exist and worsens on the ground. And we want to emphasize that whether the SDGs will be um, continuing until its projected achievement by 2030, we want to emphasize that the people's movements and many organizations who advocate for peace and development shouldn't be tied down to achieving the SDGs themselves. Rather, um, we should do our own thing of forming and joining and supporting local fights and national fights of organizations and movements towards just and lasting peace and genuine and transformative development that is founded on the people's aspirations and needs. And we want to go back to the efforts that people's movements are currently doing in relation to their fight for climate justice, their fight to resume peace talks, and at the same time their call to for their governments to really take accountability to the atrocious acts that they do within their countries in the economic and trade aspects. So at this point we really have two main calls for in relation to the UN and the way we see SDGs. First is, of course, for the UN to listen and to the demands of the people. We think that for the UN to really function, it should really take cue from the people's movement, especially in the basic sectors themselves. So we want for the UN to not side with the ruling class in accelerating its agenda, because if it continues to do so through the SDGs and other programs that it advocates, the mechanism would remain barren, if not more destructive to the people. Second is for us not to wait for the UN to listen. So we want to really form and join and support organizations that advocates for development and peace. So we encourage everyone to be involved in local campaigns, whether it's in your city and your country, internationally, against foreign military intervention and repression, and of course the pursuit for genuine and sustainable development that is founded the people's wants and needs. Yeah, I guess that's it in a nutshell. But I'll be happy to take on any questions or any reflections from the group in relation to that later on. So thank you so much again for Resist for organizing this and for inviting APR and students. Thank you. Back to you, Mog.
Thanks, Julia. That was really, really informative, and we really appreciate your perspective. Next, we are going to hear from Nzinga from the All African People's Revolutionary Party, or AAPRP, to talk about the UN peacekeepers' role in the conflict in Africa and Haiti. We are honored to have them on this webinar as they offer an invaluable education and people's analysis. So Nzinga, with that, I will hand it off to you.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Just double checking. Awesome. First, thank you to everyone for putting this together, and to our former speaker. You are right, the UN is not a neutral arbiter. It does not take into account the class relationships that are determine things. So I wanted to start off with a quote from our comrade Patrice Lumumba. He said, "The day will come when history will speak, but it will not be the history which will be taught in Brussels, Paris, Washington, or the United Nations. Africa will write its own history, and in both the North and South, it will be a history of glory and dignity." Patrice Lumumba was an African independence leader. He was the first prime minister of the Republic of Congo. In the quote above, extracted from a letter to his wife from prison, Lumumba singles out the United Nations, and this is where I want to start. We've all been taught to think that the United Nations are more or less the good guys, but what good has the United Nations really wrought when you look at them from a class from like a strong class analysis? This organization was created at the end of the colonial era, when imperialism was trying to find new ways to organize itself, and we should be suspicious of that alone. So in doing research for today, I found numerous articles from the United Nations, from their own websites and their own publications, with titles like "Why Has Africa Failed to Industrialize?" and "A Disappointing Decade for Africa." But none of these articles, none of the millions spent, or should I say millions profited, um, none of them come close to naming capitalism and imperialism as a causal factor for Africa's suffering, or the suffering around the world. Instead, the UN does what the colonizing powers have done year after year after year after year after year, and they blame Africa itself, and the African as the problem. The United Nations cannot be a force for good because it is in line with and controlled by the powers of money. There's going to be no peace when imperialism is your business model. The United Nations benefits from the assassinations of our comrade Muammar Gaddafi, from our comrade Lumumba, and the many other assassinations, wars, and expropriations that come after the assassinations. These are in line with the goals of the countries that are part of that membership. And so let's go back to the Congo. This is one of the more notorious examples. Is around 1960. Like many other leaders of the colonial struggle, Patrice Lumumba was forced to go to the left of his struggle against imperialism. Once free of the overt Belgian domination, the Congo immediately found itself fighting secessionist insurrection in the mineral-rich southeast region. The rebellion was backed by the former colonial powers, Belgium, in an attempt to destabilize the new government. So here we have independence people's movement in the Congo coming up, and now they're fighting with their former colonizer. Lumumba appeals to the UN for help against this blatant meddling in Congo's affairs. You can guess what happens. In the response, the UN Council decided to send military assistance to the Congo. It wasn't for good, of course. The leading UN staff sent over had no meaningful connection to the country. Its people are their cause. Instead, they were Westerners and naturally upper class, with far more ties to the countries Lumumba was fighting against, Belgium and the US. One thing that's worth noting is that Congo is very rich in uranium, and the US, England, and those other countries, they wanted to take that resource from Congo, and they also wanted to make sure that their enemies, the US, was fighting heavily with the Soviet Union at the time, They wanted to make sure the Soviet Union could not get a hold of those resources. Yeah. So this is a fight over resources, and I want to make that clear. Like, we're talking about people's whole lives, all for resources, all for rocks in the ground. In this book, I think it came out in 2001, The Assassination of Lumumba. There is Ludo de White has decisively proven that the UN forces worked to overthrow Lumumba rather than protecting the peace and legitimacy of the first democratically elected government. The UN only passively requested that the Belgians withdraw from the Republic of Congo. It never condemned or took real action against the blatant Belgian meddling. You can compare that with how the UN responds when it's in the interest of the imperialist powers behind it, when like forces like the United States say that the UN needs to respond. It does. It always does. And that's what happened years later in Libya when the US pressured the UN to get that no-fly zone over Libya, which the US and NATO then used to assassinate our comrade Muammar Gaddafi in the worst absolute torturous ways possible. But let's go back here. Where was I? So after Lumumba was removed and assassinated in a coup, that's when the UN took decisive action against the Katanga rebels. Reflecting on the criminal actions of the UN in sabotaging and destroying the first democratically elected government in this most exploited and oppressive nations, it is immediately obvious why it behaves as it did. The countries carrying out the actions the UN was called on to prevent, Belgium and the United States, are highly powerful, influential countries, one of whom has a seat on the UN Security Council and hosts its headquarters. It is obvious that this is why the UN helped these countries to destroy a revolution that was against their interests. Again, these are class interests. This is a class struggle. This is a class struggle happening in the real world with real lives, and it's deadly. Lumumba's tragic mistake was to trust the United Nations' supposed respect for national sovereignty and peace. We're not going to make that mistake again. And we're not going to trust the United Nations, or we're not going to trust their peace day. But let's move on. Let's move on to another example. So Ted Grant pointed out that since the Second World War, there have been wars every year, and every one, the United Nations have been unable to take action. The United Nations peacekeeping forces seem to resemble a man trying to mop up a floor with a hand sponge. So relentless is capitalism's drive to war and chaos. But it is worse than that. The UN peacekeepers are not just weak. Where they are deployed, it is not in their interest. It is not in their interest, but it is in the domain of imperialism. This was shown very early in the Congo, but it's also shown in Haiti today. The UN's lack of interest in promoting peace and helping to get the impoverished country on its feet is glaringly obvious. The only reason most of us are unaware of it is that our media is not interested in telling the story. I'd love to go on a rant on the media, so we absolutely must organize something about the media itself. But I will stay on subject for now. The UN occupation of Haiti has been ongoing for many, many years. And one of the sources I quoted when I was writing this said 11 years, but this came out years before the current occupation, years before the latest assassination of a president. So even that is inaccurate. But the point is that it's very deliberately the UN mission for the stabilization of Haiti, much in the same way that the North Korea. Where is it? I'm losing my spot. I'm sorry, but it's the point is it's very deliberate. This occupation follows a U.S. facilitated coup in 2004 against the left-wing president Aristide, who was Haiti's first first like properly elected president. The UN's mission, UN mission's official role as a neutral arbiter to stabilize the country amidst the violence and coup's aftermath, no. In reality, it has acted to suppress any attempts by Haitians to organize politically against the coup regime and in favor of Aristide or in any other left-wing anti-US government force. If the news even covers this, they'll call these people gangs. The UN forces have barred Aristide from returning to the country over and over again. In 2005, US Ambassador James Foley wrote in a confidential cable that showed that Aristide was the only person polling above 50%, which is like just shows the US and the UN knew that he was the popular person. No matter what you think of him, he's the popular person. He's the democratically elected person, and the UN does not give a. They don't care. I don't know if I can curse on this. They don't care. They are in the interest of capitalism. That's their goal, and that's what they're fighting for. They're not fighting for democracy, no matter what they tell you. Maybe democracy of dollars, democracy of money in the bank, but not democracy of people and not democracy of the people's will. So these UN forces, the stabilization forces, they really just engage in direct repression of Haitian people. One Brazilian soldier even like admitted that I'll quote him here. The truth is that not a day passes where the UN troops don't kill a Haitian in an exchange of fire. I myself definitely killed 2 others I don't look back to see. This is a quote from 2006. Independent journalists say more than 20,000 have died or disappeared in the last 10 years. Again, when I was looking at sources, my sources were a little bit old. So that number is much higher now. And there's been so much more disaster, again, with the UN's hand in it. The leader of the Brazilian Lawyers Association, Anderson Bussinger, pointed out that the international military occupation under the command of Brazil has an interest in exploiting Haitian labor through free zones. The working day is often longer than 12 hours a day, and the minimum wage amounts to a pitiful $120 a month. Not a day, not an hour, a month. These stabilization forces are raiding Haitian slums, supposedly against drug dealers or gangs, but in reality, it's against so-called resurgent populist and anti-market economy political forces. Look at that phrasing. This is the UN's own phrasing. Anti-market economy political forces. Tens of thousands have been killed and many have been raped. In November 2007, 114 members of this 950-member Sri Lanka peacekeeping contingent in Haiti were accused of sexual misconduct and abuse. 108 members, including 3 officers, have been sent back after being implicated. The UN Office of Internal Oversight Services has admitted that, quote, acts of sexual exploitation and abuse against children were frequent and occurred usually at night and at virtually every location where the contingent personnel were deployed. In 2015, the peacekeeping stabilization forces were accused of abusing hundreds more Haitians. If this wasn't bad enough, the UN peacekeepers have brought cholera to the island for the first time in 150 years, leading to over 9,000 deaths. Trying to wriggle out of this scandal, the UN is relying on its official legal immunity. But the UN is clearly responsible. Nepalese members of its forces were not screened for cholera despite the disease being prevalent in Nepal. The UN mission hired a private contractor to ensure sanitary conditions for its force in Haiti, but the contractor was poorly managed and failed to provide adequate infrastructure at the UN camp. As a result, contaminated sewage was disposed in one of Haiti's longest and most important rivers. These UN stabilizing peacekeepers, it's evident nothing short of a military occupation on behalf of the interests of those dominant imperialist powers who bankroll and run the UN. They don't want to see a popular left-wing government in place, and feel the country is sufficiently beneath the radar of public opinion and international interest for them to get away with occupying it. This then enables their companies to exploit its labor free from government intervention. This sums up the class character of the UN in general. And as far as alternatives to the UN and alternatives to these imperialist forces, we need to do what we're doing now, but on much larger scales. We need to organize and we need to go about creating systems that can crush imperialism once and for all. We are all responsible for digging the grave in which imperialism will be finally buried in. Mog, thank you.
Thank you, Nzinga. That was so thoroughly researched and so agitating. And I really appreciate your contribution to the webinar and to all of our understanding of the history of the UN's impact in global politics and what that actually looks like on the ground for the people. Next, we are going to play a video from another Resist US-led war Portland member organization, Veterans for Peace. In this video, Dan Shea will talk about the importance of people in the United States, including veterans, joining the anti-war movement in support of those around the world. Vets for Peace offers a critical perspective in the discussion on just lasting peace, as they have seen US-led war up close from the inside. So without further ado, Cody, if you could play the clip, that would be great.
Yeah, and just give me a thumbs up if you can hear it, just so I know. Anti-militarism agenda itself. Before then, I'm going to pass it over to Dan Shea from Veterans for Peace to tell us why it's important for all people within the US, including those who are in the US military, to fight back against US-led wars. Dan, pass it to you. Oh, and you're muted, Dan.
Thank you, and thank everybody for being here. I'm with Veterans for Peace. I'm also a Vietnam veteran in 1968, so I've seen the power of military and I've seen the destruction it causes. I also spent 9 months in the Philippines, so I also seen how those bases operated and the corruption that was surrounded it. But what I wanted to really raise was what somebody already said, was war is a racket. It's something that I learned very early on. This movement, which I think is so important, this movement is by indigenous people, oppressed people, people of color, citizens of nations in the shadow of US military, who broke from their chains and are leading the resistance and building a path to peace and power, power for all the people. I am angry, not out of hate, but out of love. It's a righteous anger at US imperialism. Militarism is a lesson in oppression. There is no democracy, only the ruling class, chain of command, from boot camp to the battlefield. First, you are brainwashed with lies. Surrender your compassion for hate, your beliefs you are out to save innocent lives, only to smash any and all lives, if that is the order from the devil gods from the ranks above your pay grade. You become a vicious dog, a beast, a monster to be feared, but on a leash to prevent you from turning on your masters. The only way to throw off this leash, the lies of American exceptionalism, is to resist, to think for yourself, to know that you are not alone, but a part of a revolution to end the full spectrum dominance. To join anti-military agenda, GIs and veterans know the truth of which I speak. Thus, this is the imperative, that you speak out. To join Veterans for Peace, join the anti-military campaign by Resist US-led wars. Join with other people. I wanted to say that there's one narrative that the Pentagon and the White House uses a megaphone, and it is how they manufacture consent in an effective way to make sure nobody talks about how we are corralled into the virtual playpen, monitored by the security state. I kind of plagiarized that from a friend of mine named Doug Lane. One thing that I wanted to add is what Veterans for Peace does. We're connected in our core issues. A national and international level of VFP connects members working on core issues. Specific areas that members focus on include the current and threatened wars in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Korea, and elsewhere, fighting Islamophobia and racism, stopping war on Mother Earth, ending the arms race, and eliminating nuclear weapons, counter recruitment and supporting GI resistance, very important. Heal the wounds of war, because when you come back from war, many people are broken, post-traumatic stress, exposed to toxic chemicals, oppose drone warfare. In 2018, the UN International Veterans for Peace Conference, solidarity with the First Nations people of color, immigrants, LGBTQ people, stand up for the rights of women and children worldwide, full disclosure and honest perspective on the American war in Vietnam. And to continue that, we need to all come together and refuse to support our tax dollars going toward military agenda, which is the big stick in which they oppress nation after nation. It is gunboat diplomacy, and we want real diplomacy, real democracy. All power to the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, that was Dan. Dan is such a good speaker and definitely summarized that inside scoop really beautifully. So even though he's not here, thank you to Dan. Everybody should follow Veterans for Peace. They're incredible. So now moving along to our last speaker, we're going to hear from Cody from Resist US-led War Portland and also the Resist Global Secretariat. They're going to talk about Resist's line regarding the UN's International Day of Peace and what the genuine struggle for peace needs to look like. So with that, I will hand it off to Cody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mog. Thanks, y'all, for coming on tonight. What a month this is for those of us in Portland, where we've got just less than a week now until the UN-sanctioned International Peace Day, which, like Mog mentioned earlier, happens every year, September 21st. But as we've been hearing from all of our speakers here, it's important to come out and actually answer that call. Sure, you want us to celebrate peace and what it takes to build it. Sure, we'll be out there, but don't expect us to toe your line as the United Nations because of all of the stuff that you have been doing, that these policies by the UN have done in order to keep the conditions for conflict alive. So like what Julia said about how these so-called sustainable development goals is what is going to lead to peace and development and end poverty. We've seen how it's just another excuse for foreign investment and for land grabbing and, depriving people what they actually need. I appreciate her call, United Nations, listen to the people. But and what Nzinga said, it's also not even just about socioeconomic injustice. It's about military injustice as well. It is about continuing the imperialism that the UN's strongest members, the United States, Britain, France, have been doing for years, for centuries at this point, with the way that the United Nations has actually deliberately caused its military, allowed for its military so-called peacekeeping forces to continue to crush people's movements of actual sovereignty, of actual justice, movements that are fighting for actual peace because they're trying to remove the conditions that lead to war. The United Nations has, from the get-go, not been able to meet people's needs for peace because it has been led by the largest warmongers in the world today. That's why I really appreciated Julia's second call, which was that we're going to demand that the United Nations listen to the people, but we're not going to wait. We're going to organize. We're going to do what we need to do that we know has to happen for a just and lasting peace to be achieved. That's what's so important, I think, about an organization like the Resist US-led War Movement that is global in scope, We have members all over the world, and we have two calls, like Mog said at the beginning, not just resist US-led war, but build just and lasting peace. If we're going to work to dismantle the systems that lead to war, it's also on us to fight for the systems that will keep a peaceful future for all of us. So how do we do that? I want to take the little bit of time that I have to talk about as we gear up for International Peace Day, what are the alternatives? What do we actually have to do to build this peace? For that, I'm going to draw on a document that we're really excited to produce this year as Resist US-Led War Movement, and that's the Anti-Militarism Agenda. And when I'm done talking, I can drop that in the chat, and we'll also tell you how to find it when I'm done. But in essence, it's a document that talks about what are the main calls, what is the agenda, the priorities for the anti-war movement around the world this year. And we talked to so many of our members, of our allies, of our partners, people that we've met as Resist US-Led War Movement all over the world, and we've asked them, like, what does it mean for you to resist US-led war? What does it mean to you to fight for just and lasting peace? And that's what get us to produce this anti-militarism agenda that actually lays out, sort of in summary, what all these points were. And we're hoping to use this document, updated every year, so that the people's priorities for this anti-war movement are clear. And Mog just dropped it in the chat. Please go ahead and download it. You can even follow along with me. I'm going to spend the rest of this time reading excerpts from the Resist US-Led War Anti-Militarism Agenda, because I think that this is also going to help understand why the UN on itself why the UN's language about just putting down arms for a day and thinking about what it would cost to get peace isn't good enough. For one, I'm going to go to I think page 11 of this, which is our main call under ending so-called counterterrorism warfare. So peace advocates, even when they're calling for demands that will bring peace in their communities, like national liberation, like an end to foreign investment, an end to military occupation, they're called terrorists. So even on a so-called peace day, the governments are still targeting these peace activists as enemies. How can people celebrate a day of peace if they're targeted as terrorists? So I want to read a bit of this where we call for stopping the terror tagging of freedom fighters and peace advocates. Under the War on Terror doctrine, imperialist and reactionary regimes around the world label peaceful people's movements and liberation struggles as quote unquote terrorist in order to criminalize and suppress them. Palestinian, Filipino, Lebanese, Kurdish, Latin American, Indian, Irish, and other legitimate liberation movement organizations have been placed on the US and other terrorist lists with no transparency in how such determination is made. While nearly all Palestinian resistance organizations and political parties are labeled terrorists by the Israeli state, as are Kurdish organizations by various occupier states. International collusion between police departments, international agencies, and militaries has led to repression against people's movements, including extrajudicial killings and imprisonment on trumped-up charges of activists. So if we're going to have an International Day of Peace, we have to call for the end of labeling genuine peace activists as terrorists to allow people to express what needs to happen for peace and not be afraid of having their lives ended by the war makers. On another page, on page 15, we have a section on ending economic warfare, food blockades, and sanctions. To read this, what we call, how we phrase sanctions in here is we say resist the financial hostage taking. Sanctions are financial hostage taking of activists and whole nations. The US has unilaterally enacted economic, financial, trade, and other sanctions on individuals, organizations, and over 40 countries. Over 40 countries are sanctioned by the US as a means to force their compliance with US policies. Under the guise of utilizing a more quote-unquote humane approach to perceived threats to US interests, Sanctions are essentially another form of warfare that imposes collective punishment on entire nations, most severely hurting civilians, especially people who are already impoverished. Sanctions block countries from accessing essentials, including food, vaccines and medicine, medical supplies, and resources needed for providing clean water, sanitation, and healthcare, leading to people suffering and dying from malnutrition, starvation, and preventable illness. The unwillingness of the US to waive sanctions on countries like Venezuela and Iran prevented timely provision of the COVID-19 vaccine, prolonging and exacerbating the pandemic. Sanctions kill, and they are a tool of war. So we can't be calling for International Peace Day if we're not also calling for the end of all sanctions that are starving people and exacerbating conditions of conflict. So then what do we do? In the end, near the last page of the anti-militarism agenda, page 17, we have one of my favorite sections, which is challenge US military priorities. We have to, and yes, Gene is saying, and Cuba. We actually have a whole subsection in that part of sanctions on ending the blockade of Cuba. So definitely check it out. If we are going to have a just and lasting peace, we ourselves have to get organized and challenge US military priorities and force a change in how our resources are serving people. Remember Dan's recording, he was talking about how the US military budget is weaponized. I'm actually going to read this part where we're saying demand pro-people alternatives, where we start talking about the military budget. I'm going to kick it off where Dan left off. The 2023 US military budget is officially $816 billion. I'm going to read that again. Officially $816 billion. And the 2024 budget is projected to be at least $842 billion. These numbers are in reality, though, much higher when taking into consideration the budgets for other militarized departments like Homeland Security and the Department of Energy. That also includes the military budget that's not even included there in that 816. US citizens are consistently left out of the conversation on the military budget. We've been raising our voices for years, ever since there was a military budget, to not make it so bloated. We've been raising our voices on that, but we've been left out of the conversation while weapons companies spent $50 million on political candidates in 2020 to make sure their war profiteering interests are met. This has led to funding for education, healthcare, infrastructure, and other social needs disappearing and ultimately privatizing over the years. Fighting for these social necessities requires fighting against the military priorities of the US state. We have all the resources we need. We have everything we need for universal healthcare, universal education, universal free housing, infrastructure that actually works. We have it all, but we need to force through the power of our organized voices and our action, a shift in how this budget is prioritized. And then what do? Once we can fight for control over our society, once we can actually overcome the war makers, which are at the forefront of guiding the UN policies, then we can actually build a global system for just peace. So I'm going to read our final section of the anti-militarism agenda and hope it gives us some inspiration for this month as well. The current profit and war-oriented system of governance in the US and around the world is the #1 barrier to world peace. As heroic and as reform-based political campaigns are, the system itself, that's right, the system itself must be challenged and rebuilt from the grassroots up. We need justice, social equity, and solidarity among peoples. This will sound familiar. This is what Mog was telling about at the beginning from our Resist Manifesto. Solidarity among peoples, including the recognition of the right to self-determination economic and food sovereignty, and self-defense of nations and oppressed peoples from reactionary aggression and violence. We must build peace through genuine sustainable development, not the UN Sustainable Development Goals, job creation, and the health and well-being of our communities. We have so much opportunity to do this in Portland. We have so many war-making companies in our city. We've got Boeing that has a special connection trying to funnel students from Portland State University into its internship programs. We've got Precision Cast Parts that makes the pieces for the US nuclear arsenal right here in Portland. You know, we've got Intel that's making all the new microchips that are going into the high-tech weapons that are being made. So much. We've got NuScale Energy, the nuclear energy power company that is trying to sell small modular reactors to the Philippines, while the Filipino people are saying, we don't want this. This will just make us more, this will just heighten the military tension in the region of Asia Pacific. So many opportunities to build a movement. And it's not just opportunities to dismantle these war-making systems, it's opportunities to build a peaceful, genuine alternative. We have to be ready to fight, we have to be ready to unite, and if we can do that, there's nothing that we can't do. So join the Resist US-led War movement in Portland and around the country and around the world, and join us in our activities this month, which Mog will talk all about when I pass it back to them. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Cody. Yes, join Resist US-led War. I dropped some flyers in the chat, which we will get to a little bit later, but just so that you know that you have them. We have a little bit of time for questions. Does anybody in the crowd have a question for either one of the speakers or the whole group of speakers? We have like, I could give us like 15 minutes for questions.
I have a question. How do you recruit young people for your movements? Because I've been out in the street since it seems like 1884, and as the years go on, we're having less and less interest from the younger people. I have no idea. We're mystified by it all. But maybe since you're all young, you have an idea that we haven't come across yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah, do any of the speakers have an answer for Joseph?
I can answer first. Thanks, Joseph, for your question. You know, I empathize with how hard it is, even as a young person myself. It's really a struggle and a challenge to organize young people nowadays. Well, right now, I work in a research network, but during my university days, I was also a student organizer, student organizer, youth. So, I guess one way that we operated during those days was to really listen to what the youth has to say, first and foremost, and not really impose any of the ideas or thoughts that we have. Of course, we want to educate and arouse them into action, into organizing and stuff like that. But I think what warrants for it to work is to really listen to them first, and to also get in the know of what's trendy the youth nowadays. Well, especially with during the past 2 years, social media has been such a useful tool in organizing the youth. I think there are a lot of organizations to maximize platforms such as Facebook or Instagram or Twitter to reach out to a lot of youth who wants to, you know, do something about the situation but don't know where to start. So I think that's where organizations should really, you know, take the opportunity and come in to arouse, organize, and mobilize people, especially the youth nowadays. So I think, yeah, just to summarize my thoughts, is first to listen to what the youth has to say. The second is explore and be creative about the ways of working and organizing that we can do. And yeah, I guess that's some of the things that I have from my years of organizing. Hope that answers that. Thanks.
Yeah, I know that I was with both Zach and Sam down in downtown Portland today at the Youth Climate Strike. I don't know, Zach or Sam, if y'all want to talk about how that was and how, because those youth were very much in the streets.
Yeah, Joseph, it's a good question. You know, I've been telling folks here, the organizers, that this is like a very different organizing space for me recently. I'm new to the peace movement. Where I really got my entrance to the peace movement actually was with like an older crowd of, you know, kind of 60s and 70s anti-war activists who are still going. You know, around Oregon, there's a large community. Ashland, I know Gene was from Ashland. Like there's, you know, some like historic activists, you know, that are just, you know, legends in the community. And so then coming to a space with like a lot of young people has been super exciting for me as a young person as well, to see both sides of that. But yeah, we were out today at the climate strike. There was, you know, 5,000 people under the age of probably 25, you know, and we were handing out flyers for our 21st rally, and there were people like taking them out of my hand. I said, you know, International Peace Day, and they were like, wait, what was that? And then, you know, I'd hand it to one, and then like a group of 5 would just be like, wait, can I get a picture of that? Like, we're, you know, so they're educated, informed. They, like Julia was just saying, you know, they're getting their information quickly, and they're getting truthful information through alternative media sources that are, you know, not hiding any information from them anymore, which, you know, the traditional legacy media has been able to for decades. And it just I'm very impressed with the young people that I've met over the last few weeks, months, and, you know, years, honestly, who are informed and ready and activated and agitated, and are not just, you know, willing to take the mainstream line that the U.S. is a good actor around the world, and we need to bomb every enemy and their you know, civilians, because they're a threat to the United States. So people are waking up.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Does anybody else have a question for our speakers? Do any speakers have questions for other speakers? Zach?
I guess the question is like, who is leading the effort on like building out a like post-militaristic world, you know, like yeah.
That's on all of us, I think. I don't think we can even start I mean, we can imagine what a post-militaristic world looks like, but it's just that imagining. But to me, that the hope is the knowledge that once we can actually like get organized, because that is step number 1. No matter if your focus is tearing down the old or building up the new, you got to get organized to do all of it. And I think it's in the process of getting organized that we start to see what's actually possible, not just hope for it. We actually get to see it. You know, part of, and this is actually an important part of our campaign this month here in Portland, is, I know the MOG dropped the flyer also in here, but we're organizing for mutual aid in Hawaii right now. You know, Maui, the Lahaina was devastated, absolutely devastated. I have friends who lost family, and who the rest of the family lost all their houses and everything. But there are organizations on the ground, you know. Meanwhile, the US military is sent in. For some reason, it's the military that's sent in to save people and look like they're rebuilding, because then it's another excuse to, you know, quote unquote, honor the troops, which Dan, as a U.S. veteran, will tell you never to say, because it's as a veteran, he says that it gives them more excuse for U.S.-led war. But meanwhile, what's actually happening on the ground is private money is coming in to buy up all that land that was destroyed. And the military bases are kept pristine, they're kept protected. The military bases all on Hawaii are not being destroyed. So what we're doing as the Resist US-Led War movement and the organizations organizing International Peace Month in Portland is we're doing a community-supported fundraiser for the Hawaii Workers Center. We're trying to raise money to give organizations on the ground who are building up. And that's that act of hope. That's that action of hope, of getting organized and being ready to, it's not the better world yet. It's not the post-military world, but it's showing what's possible from actual communities when the government that has all the funds it needs is not actually doing anything. So I think that the act of getting organized and every small victory along the way, that is the start of the post-militaristic worlds, even if it's going to take a while and we're going to have to get through the fire to get there. I know we will.
Do any of the other speakers have an answer to that question? Or do you feel like they got covered? Thumbs up from Julia. Cool. Yeah, and I was just gonna say too, there's a lot of really powerful and oftentimes well-practiced revolutionary people's movements across the world that have really thorough strategies for their movement and what they envision for the future. So if you want to get like specific, I think that you can look into different revolutionary movements and see what folks are saying across the world, because it's also regionally dependent, depending on what people are facing, what they're struggling against, and what they need to be different. Yes, okay, beautiful. Are there any other questions, or are we feeling tapped out? Okay. Feel free to reach out to us if anything comes up. That is our program. Yeah, thank you, Cody. This is some information for Resist US-Led War. There's the website. There's the anti-militarism agenda, which you have access to, and some other key campaigns that are up right now. Please check us out. Before we go, we need to plug our International Day of Peace month of action, which, as you can see, is pretty impressive. Today is the webinar. You made it. Next is the rally on the 21st. Meet us in Pioneer Square at 6 p.m. to just put some boots on the ground and actually make your voice heard. On the 23rd, there's going to be an anti-imperialist clown show featuring a bunch of anti-war activists locally that are going to be tabling and speaking and giving out resources. So just get plugged in and also have like a goofy, weird time. Then Bayan is going to be putting on what is this? This is a speaking tour on the labor movement in the Philippines. So that's on the 24th. We don't have a location for that yet, so just keep tuned. Then there's going to be a No to APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Coalition webinar on free trade and militarization. That was a bunch of jargon, but basically come and learn about how neoliberalism and capitalism on the global level is not the answer. And specific ways that you can get involved in opposing it. On the 29th, we have Portland Peace and Justice Works, which is a rally for peace and justice in Syria and Afghanistan. And on the 30th, we're going to have a history of human rights violations and human rights defenders walking tour around Portland. And that's going to be an amazing opportunity to just like really build some relationships and get the nitty gritty on what's been going on in Portland for a long time. So yes, you have all of the flyers, and of course you have access to the fundraiser for relief efforts in Maui. So please pass that around to everyone that you know, put it on your social media. And before we go today, I'm also going to drop a link to the Resist US-led War Portland interest form. If you are interested in getting involved with us, just go ahead and plop some information into this very easy and also fun Google form, and we will follow up with you. And before we go, we would love to take a picture with everybody. So if you have a little thing, a little sign, that's great. Otherwise, you can just like put your face on. You do peace sign, do whatever feels good. I'm gonna write my sign real quick. Resist US-led war, fight for just and lasting peace, that kind of thing. Is this gonna be backwards though? Oh, it's gonna be
It looks
blurred.
like it looks like it for you. It'll be right side up for everyone else, I promise.
Okay.
Mine looks
Okay.
backwards.
Okay, it looks fine. Awesome. All right, and then when everybody's ready, Cody, are you good to take the screenshot? It looks like Julia's still writing something down.
That's
Zach,
all
too.
good. Time's clicking, Julia. No, I'm just kidding. Nice. Oh, yours is the most readable one. So it's great. All right. So get ready on 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Got the picture. We'll put up on our newly made Resist US-led War Portland social media, which also exists now.
Yeah, I'm dropping a link, so grab it before you go. Thank you so much for coming out today. I'm going to stop the recording. Really appreciate all of your time, and we'll see you out on the streets on the 21st.
Bye, y'all. See you there.